there's already problems with set 11 and it hasn't even come out yet. For example, the visual clarity has never been this bad, and in some combats it's almost impossible to make out what's going on. There's also a new trait, Storyweaver, which is the worst summon trait in recent history, and similarly this set brings Fortune, which is again by far one of the worst econ traits they've ever made, which is shocking considering how Piltover had the exact same problems back in set 9, and here we are again? But that's not all. There's the riot classic of a mediocre battle pass, units with overloaded kits, awful hero augments, and perhaps the biggest controversy of set 10, the bag size changes are here to stay. But what fatal flaw does Fortune expose in TFT's 3 sets a year system? What are the problems with the new set mechanic encounters, and why is Morgana my most hated unit ever since set 3? But before we get into that, I will stress that my focus is scrutinizing the details of set 11 and its mechanics. Okay, so let me start with probably the biggest problem, which is Fortune, because the problem with the trait could extend beyond the game itself and relates to how Riot make each TFT set. So what are the problems with Fortune? First off, Fortune is absolutely useless in the late game or if you're win streaking. You only ever play Fortune if you start the game with those units, otherwise you never bother with the traits. Also, this trait is so heavily punishing due to the fact that you lose luck when you win. This feels absolutely awful, and 5 Fortune feels so useless. Sure, the tactician healing is good, but it doesn't increase your loot or luck. So not only are you at the mercy of the die when you activate Fortune, but also investing deeper into Fortune doesn't help you mitigate that enough to ever be worth it. You'll only really be able to activate 5 Fortune in the late game, by which point, again, it's not really worth it. And another problem with Fortune being a dead trait in the late game is that the Fortune units essentially have one less trait. Since most Fortune units only have 2 traits, that means these units will have very little playability. You'll only ever see Teemo in a trick shot board, you'll only ever see Kobako in a bruiser board, and you'll only ever see Tristana on a duelist board. Zoe does have another trait, that being Storyweaver, but she doesn't really gain much benefit from that trait. For Zoe, Vertical Arcanist is far more valuable. Annie is the only Fortune unit that will be common to play in the late game, but that's not due to her other trait, Invoker. Rather, that's due to Annie's ability and her being a source of anti-heal and burn. In fact, Invoker only really starts giving value to most of the Invokers at 4. Kog'Maw, Lilia, Alune, and Janna don't get much value from 2 Invoker and that 5 mana because they already have perfect ult costs with mana generating items like Blue Buff or Shojin. 2 Invoker only gives value every 6 seconds for these units, but that's assuming they haven't already cast in the meantime. 2 Invoker is only really useful for your tanks, if that. For comparison, the Augment Infusion is 20 mana every 5 seconds, so the value of 2 Invoker is a mere fraction of this Augment. So while Annie is splashable, you aren't getting much value out of her traits if you aren't investing deep into them. I'm of the opinion that every trait should at least have some value in the late game, but that cannot be said for Fortune because it literally has none whatsoever. And so when traits are irrelevant like this, you have less options in the shape of your late game board. And this also means that it's difficult to pivot out of Fortune because there are no core units to play around. I mean, they could solve this problem by assigning more power budget to these units to make up for the lack of traits, however that results in units that are blatantly overpowered. Especially with spatulas and emblems being so incredibly accessible, these units will become extreme outliers. Things like Bruiser Annie and Sniper Teemo are already strong, but other combinations like Umbral or Reaper Tristana could be oppressive. And while I could say the cash outs are not worth it, I'm sure they could easily get buffed. My issues with the traits are more fundamental. Fortune is just too difficult to play, lacking outs, far too punishing, and it doesn't really have a proper middle breakpoint that's worth going for. It feels like no matter what you do around Fortune, you just get punished. And if you recall, these are the exact same problems as set 9's Piltover. But Fortune is categorically worse due to the variance of having to roll a dice to see when you'll cash out, and the fact that you lose luck whenever you win. So after everything we learned about Piltover in set 9 and Heartsteel in set 10, why are we back at square one with this terrible trait in set 11? Well, that's because this set was already in production before set 9 had even released. As implied here by the designers, they began working on set 11 back in March 2023, which is around the same time set 8.5 was released. So after the work on set 8 was completed, set 11 promptly started production. Now that's not inherently a problem at all. The issue here is that set 11 has made the same failures as set 8, 9 and 10 despite being a set that preceded all of them. How does something like that even happen? Well, that's because those lessons and learnings were made long after set 11 started production. Again, set 11 started in March 2023, whereas the learnings article for set 9 was released an entire 9 months later in October October. Of course, by that point, the set design could have already been completed and finalized, excluding anything learnt from set 9. And this is definitely true for set 10, as that learnings article was released while set 10 was being playtested. So this shows to me that any and all learnings that are made after a set do not get applied to sets in production, and we can still go backwards even in successive sets like we have for set 11. But let me be explicitly clear here. This is not the fault of any designer or any dev working on TFT. The fault here seemingly lies on the new 3 sets a year structure. This optimized system of producing 3 sets a year does indeed produce a lot of content in said year. However, a dire consequence of this is that it does not allow the team to improve on the previous few sets, and sometimes, like we have in set 11, repeat the same mistakes. The parallel structure or workflow of TFT sets in this new system might not be flexible enough to allow for a team to make suitable overhauls during development due to the split resources. Any and all learnings would only get applied when the new system allows them to, which is every 3 sets or every 12 months. So with this new system, there may now be a huge delay in these lessons being actualized in a TFT set, and the system can mean a single TFT set can actually be several sets behind, which creates a super jarring experience for players. And it gets even worse considering that the pod for set 11 is soon to start production on set 14. So again, any learnings made from set 11, set 12 and certainly 13 will not be carried over to set 14. And personally, I find this absolutely mental, because I know for certain that the designers for TFT are phenomenal at what they do. But to me, it seems that there are limitations capping their potential with these mistakes slipping through. And these mistakes are detrimental because they undermine other fantastic features in this set, and they don't serve the devs or the community any justice. And this does leave me a bit concerned for set 12, as I don't know if we'll see the fruition of the learnings again. Now, as I mentioned, set 11's summon trait, Storyweaver, is the worst summon trait in recent history. But honestly, it may be the worst of all time. The issues with Storyweaver were brought to my attention by my community, specifically Fungal Fury. They made me aware of how fundamentally overpowered this trait is for so many reasons, and honestly, after considering this myself, I think it'll take numerous patches to properly fix this, or maybe even an entire rework. So what makes this trait so OP? Well, Vertical Storyweaver itself is too strong due to its structure. For example, if you look at a board of all the Storyweaver units, you have so many easy to activate traits, which is perfect for spamming epic and legendary units. There's an Ink Shadow variant, a Mythic variant, a Legendary Super variant, and so on. Genuinely, a Storyweaver vertical board has easy to activate synergies for literally every single legendary. This in turn means that the best way to play Storyweaver is to just send it to 9 for 7 Storyweaver, a powerful KO, and legendary units. The benefit to rerolling the Storyweaver units is not even remotely close to the power of sending it to 9. KO scales harder from the deeper vertical than she does from the startup units. And even if that wasn't the case, rerolling is just generally far riskier and so almost never worth it. But with Storyweaver, you have the insane power and utility of a summon combined with the sheer power of legendary units, resulting in an obscenely strong board. Funnily enough, the Heavenly trait has the exact same problem, where again, the best way to play it is to aim for the vertical and play legendaries rather than rerolling. But while Heavenly can be nerfed, Storyweaver still will just have too many synergies with legendary units, and so there will likely never be any point to rerolling without a rework to the trait. Storyweaver is the exact opposite of Country in set 10, and we've clearly taken a step back from what summon traits should be. So again, we have another example of learnings not getting carried over from successive sets. For example, one of the great things about Country was the fact that you needed to play at least one 3-cost unit to activate the trait. This meant that the early game power of Country was inconsistent and unreliable, and so wouldn't stabilize early game boards. But Storyweaver is the exact opposite of that, and to activate the trait you can have as little as 2 1-costs and a 2-cost unit. In the early game, this means you can easily beat up a unit on your opponents, and not only that, you have control over Kael's buff and her positioning, so you can easily throw together a strong board. And don't even get me started on the fact Storyweaver has an emblem that you can get at 2-1 as well. Being able to play 5 Storyweaver in stage 2 is just so stupid, and it's literally the freest win streak ever. Similarly, since you are stable playing around Kael in the early and mid game, you'll easily have enough HP and gold to reach 9 or even 10 to then spam legendary units. And every time you level up, you spike in board power because you can either play an expensive unit with the sheer amount of synergies you have, or just another Storyweaver. The strategy around Storyweaver is so linear and boring, it's just so frustratingly simple. So to sum it up, Storyweaver gives you higher early game power with an extra unit, great synergies with higher cost units, a 10 trait prismatic, a craftable spat, easy level 9 and level 10, huge spikes at every level for better units, legendaries or more Storyweavers, insane flexibility around most units in the entire set, and an extremely straightforward and simple way to play. This results in a strong early, mid and late game. So where exactly is the weakness? I've come to hate this trait so much because it's a consistent top 4 every time, and it just can't be like that, man, come on. Admittedly, Riot can address some of these issues, like removing the Storyweaver emblem from appearing at 2-1. They need to do that because it's so warping to get that early game. But Riot cannot change the trait structure or its synergies with the high cost units. So I believe this trait will continue to be a problem throughout set 11. And honestly, in my opinion, this makes Storyweaver the worst summon trait in TFT history. Now, let's move on to something I was looking forward to in set 11, and that's the return of hero augments. I love them in set 8 and set 9, so surely set 11 has some great ones, right? Nope. Unfortunately, the hero augments in set 11 are just awful. In my opinion, the only good hero augments are Shen's Ethereal Blades and Garen's Storied Champion. And I mean good in the sense that they transform how the unit functions and in turn how you itemize that unit. Most of set 11's hero augments do not do this, and the only ones that do are iterations of previous versions. Shen's Ethereal Blades is an improved version of his set 8 augment Time Knife, and Garen's Storied Champion is set 8 Garen but more of an emphasis on his damage. The other hero augments like Yorick's and Kobako's just make their abilities do more damage. They do not change how you play around these units, nor do they change how you itemize them. They're not really transformative at all. By Riot's definition, hero augments are supposed to turn the tanks into carries, but all the augments do is, lol, do more damage. But I can understand the problem for Nico because she's one of the only tanks in both Heavenly and Arcanist. However, overall, hero augments in set 11 have been a huge letdown. Okay, now let's move on to the problems with some specific units, of which by far the biggest offender is Morgana. The problem with Morgana isn't her traits or anything like that, it's her massive DOT AoE ult and the fact that it has random targeting. Random targeting should never be a thing in TFT. If you're playing against it, it feels awful because Morgana can randomly nuke your carry that you've positioned in a way to avoid abilities like that. And Morgana's ult especially has massive spread, so depending on who it randomly hits can make such a vast difference. And if you're the one playing Morgana, it feels horribly inconsistent and frustrating because there's not much you as a player can do to capitalize and play around Morgana because again, it's random. I've had it where Morgana has ulted the same frontline unit 3 times in a row, but other times she perma ults the backline and they all die within 5 seconds of combat. That is absolutely not okay. Again, random targeting should never be a thing in TFT. But I thought this was a lesson we learned back in set 3. So why in set 11 is this becoming an issue again? But that is why I despise Morgana. She is by far the most inconsistent and unreliable unit in the past several sets of TFT, and there's just nothing you can do about it. But Morgana aside, there's another problem just generally with units in this set, and that's them having overloaded kits. Most of the 5 costs and surprisingly some of the 3 costs have so much going on and they can just kind of do everything. Of the 5 costs, I feel like Lissandra, Set and Hui can scale out of their minds through their AD or AP scaling or the sheer utility they bring to your board through extra items or duplicated units. And there's also Xayah and Rakan, which are literally 2 units in one. Now this is bad for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's so hard to tell what's going on. You're like, okay, so Set picks up and slams the unit, right? Then you hover the tooltip and your brain gets smacked by Riot's dictionary. It's just overwhelming. But secondly, these kits make other units, especially of the same cost, feel worse. Azir feels like the worst 5 cost just because his kit is the most simple when it's not bad by any means. And in regards to the 3 costs, the ones that can just do everything are Soraka, Elune and Illaoi. Soraka in particular has an infinite source of AP, an AoE ability that can nuke, mana reave and ally healing through Altruist. Similarly, Elune has an AoE nuke, innate shred, an attack speed bonus, X-Group through Umbral and mana generation through Invoker. These units don't really feel like 3 costs. Honestly, if I was looking at these kits and had to guess what cost they were, I'd say 5. Especially since Elune's ability in set 11 is similar to Ziggs in set 10. Anyway, let me briefly talk about Jax for a second. Even if you have a 3-star Jax, I don't feel like you should ever itemize him. His traits give him damage reduction and his ability gives him armor and MR. So so items would be more impactful on other units as Jax already has a substantial amount of tankiness. Putting items on Jax feels kinda redundant. This makes Jax feel like a support unit that you never itemize, which is something that contradicts Riot's philosophy about units in TFT. But generally units across the board have much more bloated kits. I mean, maybe that's the direction they want to take this set, but that contributes to the problem of visual clarity, because each individual unit is doing so much more than they would have in the past. But speaking of visual clarity, let's talk about that now. There are so many AoE abilities and visual effects that trying to understand what is going on during combat is almost impossible if you're unfamiliar with the set. I genuinely had to go back and watch the VODs of my streams to understand who is doing what ability. Why is my frontline suddenly in my backline? Where is all the CC coming from? And why are my units dealing no damage? These questions were not answerable during my first few days on the PBE. Because listen, I'm a bit slow, I get confused easily, my brain could not process whatever was going on. And I know for a fact that most players will definitely feel this same problem because most players don't record or stream their games to play back. So genuinely, set 11 has a pretty steep learning curve with all of the new units, mechanics and augments, but also trying to interpret and understand whatever is going on. I am worried that this steep learning curve will lead to a more frustrating experience for players as they try to learn the set. But speaking of the new set mechanic, of course there's problems with that as well. Set 11's mechanic is encounters, where a champion will appear and add a random effect to the game. This can vary from making a champion bigger to moving your augments to completely random rounds. Honestly, this mechanic is actually pretty fun for the most part, but there are some pretty obvious problems. For example, I really hate the encounters like Lux where the augment selections are moved to random rounds. I had a game where all the augments were guaranteed to be prismatic through the prismatic party portal, but no one in the lobby saw their second augment until 5-2. That game was just so boring and frustrating to play, and several players were already dead before they saw their second augment. I don't think that should ever be the case, and I'd be happy if these encounters were removed or changed so the augments appeared earlier rather than later. I think making them appear so late just feels bad in general. And it can be very jarring when you have several encounters and carousels in the same stage because you keep getting yanked away from your board. I honestly find it really disorientating, especially combined with all the visual clutter in this set. I feel like some encounters don't need to do that, or at the very least, these encounters could be sped up to reduce that feeling. Some encounters do feel like they waste a lot of time and you're just standing around doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. And there are little things that should be tweaked. For example, Wukong's encounter where he gives you 6 rating items. This encounter should not be able to give you a Rascal Gloves. Getting that is so OP because you're basically up a rating item compared to everyone else. But again, generally, encounters are a good set mechanic that brings a lot of fun variance to the game. Lastly, there's also problems with portals. While most portals are being carried over from set 10, issues have arisen with the reintroduction of emblem augments. Specifically, if you're playing the Wandering Trainer portal, you can still get offered emblems or spat augments, which I believe should not be a thing. The dummy is already very powerful in the sense that you one unit into 3 different traits without having to field anything. That is precisely the reason why heart augments were removed from the game. They were just too powerful for the exact same reason. Especially once you add another spat or emblem to the mix, then your board can hit an extreme power spike far sooner than you should be able to, even in the Wandering Trainer portal. This interaction bypasses the hidden rule Riot added into set 11, where you cannot get more than 1 spat or emblem for a single trait through the augment system to prevent extreme high roll situations. So for the same reasons the hidden rule was implemented, Riot should prevent these augment emblems from appearing at 2-1. Or alternatively, Riot could apply the hidden rule to this specific portal as well. Similarly, there's a new portal dubbed Wandering Vendors that also gives you a dummy, but this time with 2 permanently attached support items. Now firstly, perhaps due to this portal or due to the abundance of support items, Needlessly Big Gem has been substantially nerfed where it no longer grants any gold. You may be surprised by this, but I'm a huge fan of this change. As a support item, Needlessly Big Gem was way too good, as not only did it give you a massive damage boost, but it also bolstered your econ. That was just way too good. But I know there's others who love this item for those same reasons. However, a much larger issue is the new Zarot portal. If you get the support item on your dummy, then your frontline is almost guaranteed, because not only does your dummy have 1000 HP, but so does the Void Spawn. So you literally start the game with double the frontline than anyone else, which makes your early game extremely stable and reliable. Considering that what you get on the dummy is purely random, that is not even remotely fair in my opinion. I find that the early game effect of the Void Spawn is vastly superior to anything else you could get, and since it scales with stage, it's still good in the late game. But by far the biggest problem with dummies is the fact that you can get 2 of the same support item on them. This is especially warping when you get double Zeeks or double Chalice. There was a reason why these items were removed from being craftable. They can be obscenely powerful when they're stacked. I personally do not believe you should be able to get 2 of the same support item, because just generally, that's far stronger than anything else you could have gotten. Everyone else in your lobby likely got 2 different support items, so if you get double of the same, again, you're already ahead of the other players before the game has even begun, which of course isn't fair. And for the most part, those are all of the problems I currently have with set 11. Someone on stream asked me whether or not set 11 is better than set 10, and my answer is still the same. No, it's not. Set 11 is not better than set 10 because in many cases we have taken a step back, and it looks like it's already too late to fix many of these issues. For example, the launch state of set 11 will be pretty bad with balance issues and numerous bugs. There's augments like Everything Must Go, traits like Heavenly, and units like many of the 4 and 5 costs which are wildly overperforming due to bugs or just being overtuned. How is it that they started making set 11 so early and there's still so many bugs? You'd think the benefit of this new system is a polished product coming out, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And the efficiency of this new system doesn't seem to be paying off. Honestly, I feel like set 10 spoiled us in many ways. The launch state was vastly superior, units didn't have extreme deviations in power from their cost, and augments were in the right tier. Set 11 does look exciting for now because it's new and refreshing, but once people clock on to meta compositions and clear outliers, I feel like this set will be a nightmare to play, and I'm kinda glad this set will only last 3 months. But that's not to say set 11 won't be any fun. I promise you, you will have a lot of fun learning how to play this new set and theory crafting comps to play, especially through the Exalted trait. If you don't already know, the Exalted units change from game to game, and it's honestly so insanely fun trying to build a comp around these units. Every game presents you with a unique puzzle that you need to solve, and it's such a great feeling. The devs have also pre-assigned which combination of champions can be exalted each game, so you can't low or high roll with them. And this trait summons an XP egg that you can sell at any point of the game for said XP, which means you can either re-roll or level with this trait. Honestly, this trait is clearly extremely well thought out and well designed. Props to the designers for this one, it is genuinely amazing. Exalted is so much of a slam dunk that I hope to see something like it in every future set. Also, just look at Wukong's traits. Great Heavenly Sage. He's the Great Heavenly Sage. That's so sick. That's actually so sick. I actually love it so much. It's so cool. Really smart and clever design here from the devs, specifically Linda. Awesome job. I genuinely love this. And that's just the things I know they did. I'm certain there's other amazing works they did that I just don't know. But again, I feel as though the 3 sets a year system is causing limitations on these designers. For example, even though I amongst many players absolutely adore Exalted, I suspect that the earliest we'll see anything like Exalted again will be next year in set 14. Finally, I wanted this video to express perspectives from me and my community. And as you guys reminded me in the community post, criticism is important for the things we love as a means to make what we love as great as they can be. So thank you to Chica, Alan, David, Yikes, Horse and Drew. Your comments and insight helped guide me in making this video. Thank you guys for being patient with me, and I truly hope this video helps make TFT shine like the gem it truly is. But yeah, this video is already getting extremely long now, so I'll pass over the questions to you guys. What do you think about these problems in set 11? Do you think they have the potential to ruin the entire set? Or can they all be swept under the carpet? And are you looking forward to this set's release? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching. I know this one took a while, and I'll catch you in the next one.